how do I start this video? You see, when people discuss where we come from as human beings, a lot of people like to dabble in semantics. There are only 5 ethnic backgrounds, or 5 places where people actually come from. Africa, Europe, East Asia, South Asia, Middle East. You can be from multiple places. You can be from 2 or 3. You can have Middle Eastern heritage, you can, whatever the case is. But these are the places. There's no such thing as South American heritage. That doesn't exist. Argentinians, for example, are European who just migrated to South America. There's no such thing as a white African. That doesn't exist. They just migrated from Europe to Africa. Mexicans are just descendants of Spanish. They probably have some South Asian mix in there as well, but they come from one of these or 2 of these 5 places because this is where we all come from. Okay, so why do I point that out? In America, obviously I'm an outsider, but you have the African American label, you have the Asian American label, you have the Indian American label, but then white people are just American, and that's always been weird to me because I know for a fact that every Caucasian on this planet Earth comes from Europe. And recently on TikTok, the label of European American has been going viral. So I thought to myself, let's look at how Great Britain colonized America. Because a lot of Americans, the European ones, are actually British or have British heritage. A lot of them have Irish heritage as well. A lot of them have French heritage as well. And I believe if you're looking at Americans and you're going to label Americans, to let them know, by the way, the African Americans are African Americans, to let them know that you are African American. You're not American, you are African American. We should be fair because all Americans are migrants. Nobody comes from America because it isn't one of these 5 places.
92, a Spanish expedition headed by the Italian explorer Christopher Columbus sailed west to find a new trade route to the Far East, but landed in what came to be known to Europeans as the New World. After this event, in the next decades, more and more ships sailed west to establish colonies and trade posts. The Spaniards began building their American empire, using islands such as Cuba, Puerto Rico, and Hispaniola as bases. They expanded hugely. France founded colonies in eastern North America, a number of Caribbean islands, and small coastal parts of South America. Portugal colonized Brazil.
Sorry to pause the video here. I just wanted to speak to how this relates to someone like me. Both my parents are Caribbean, but obviously not really, because they aren't one of the 5. My African ancestors on my father's side were transported by the French into the Caribbean, which is why I have a white French last name on that side. One of the reasons why my name is Pierre. And this is essentially how most Caribbean people came into the Caribbean. Now, on my mother's side, that wasn't the case, but most Caribbean people came into the Caribbean via this slave trade.
The eastern seacoast was settled primarily by English colonists in the 17th century, along with a much smaller number of Dutch and Swedes. The first successful English colony, Jamestown, was established in 1607 on the James River in Virginia. New wave of settlers arrived in the late 17th century and established commercial agriculture based on tobacco. Even though there were some conflicts between the Native Americans and English settlers, the colonies managed to expand pretty fast and more people settled in. Each of the 13 American colonies had slightly different governmental structure. In fact, a colony was ruled by a governor appointed from London. This governor controlled the administration and relied upon a locally elected legislature to vote taxes and make laws. By the 18th century, the American colonies were growing very rapidly, and as a result of low death rates, along with ample supplies of land and food, this attracted a heavy flow of immigrants. The tobacco and rice plantations imported African slaves for labor from the British colonies in the West Indies, and by the 1770s, African slaves comprised 1/5 of the American population. The question of independence from Britain did not arise as long as the colonies needed British military support against the French and Spanish powers. The French and Indian War was an event created by the political development of the colonies. It was also part of the larger 7 Years' War. Britain beat French forces, and France lost their colonies and territories in Canada and Louisiana. The war was costly, and Britain needed money. The British Parliament passed the Stamp Act of 1765, imposing a tax on the colonies without going through the colonial legislatures. The issue was drawn. Did Parliament have this right to tax Americans who were not represented in it? Crying, "No taxation without representation." The colonists refused to pay the taxes, as tensions escalated in the late 1760s and early 1770s. The Boston Tea Party in 1773 was marked as the start of the Revolution. It happened in the town of Boston to protest against the new tax on tea. Parliament quickly responded the next year with the Coercive Acts, stripping Massachusetts of its historic right of self-government and putting it under army rule, which sparked outrage and resistance in all 13 colonies. Leaders from all 13 colonies gathered and created the First Continental Congress to coordinate their resistance. The Congress called for a boycott of British trade, published a list of rights and grievances, and petitioned the king for redress of those grievances. It wasn't about independence at that point, but this appeal had no effect, and so the Second Continental Congress was created in 1775. In order to organize the defense of the colonies against the British Army. The 13 colonies began a rebellion against British rule in 1775, and proclaimed their independence in 1776 as the United States of America. In the American Revolutionary War, 1775 to 1783, the Americans captured the British invasion army at Saratoga in 1777, secured the Northeast, and encouraged...
So the original Americans were just a bunch of upset Brits. Brits that were upset about the tax on tea? Blimey, hell, mate.
Encouraged the French to make a military alliance with the United States. France brought in Spain and the Netherlands, thus balancing the military and naval forces on each side, as Britain had no allies. General George Washington was an excellent organizer and administrator, who worked successfully with Congress and the state governors, selecting and mentoring his senior officers, supporting and training his troops, and maintaining an idealistic Republican army. The American Revolution was a success, and at the Peace of Paris of 1783, their independence was recognized. And even so, the former colonies gained more than expected.
Wait. George Washington. I gotta do the maths on this. Would George Washington have been born a Brit? Would he have been born a Brit? When was George Washington born? George Washington was British. That's crazy. Was a tea drinking, full English eating, beans on toast Brit. Damn.
The expansion to the west started, incorporating the Amerindian lands west of the Appalachian Mountains. A deal was made by the United States President Thomas Jefferson in 1803. He bought the Louisiana Territory from France. Initial diplomats sent to France were allowed to spend up to $10 million in order to buy just New Orleans, and, if possible, the west bank of the Mississippi River. But the French government said that for $5 million more, all of the Louisiana Territory would be sold. The president approved the deal, and the U.S. doubled its size. In the middle of the 19th century, some cessions were happening, and Texas, in joining the Union in 1845...
Thomas Jefferson was also a Brit, by the way. He's not funny, but he is funny.
And after the war against Mexican Empire, the United States will take important lands and expand even further. In 1861, after Abraham Lincoln was elected, some states from the South, the Confederation, attacked the rest. The South Revolt was happening due to controversy over the enslavement of black people. In 1860, the United States was led by Abraham Lincoln, supporting banning slavery in all territories. War broke out in April 1861, when secessionist forces attacked Fort Sumter in South Carolina. After 4 years of war, the Union achieved its victory, and the Confederates were defeated. National unity was slowly restored. The national government expanded its power. The 19th century was a period of economic expansion. More and more industries were created, and also the accent was put on infrastructure. In 1898, the American-Spanish War is happening. Americans are winning in short term some battles, and at the Treaty of Paris, US is getting the Philippines, Puerto Rico, and Guam. At the beginning of the 20th century, World War I started. Even though the US was neutral due to German attacks on the American ships, and due to their intentions to make Mexico join against the US, the Americans joined the Allies. After this event, the economy was growing and all was good, until the Great Depression, which started in 1929. This event shook the world and created a base on which the Second World War will start. United States joined the Allies after being attacked at Pearl Harbor.
So yes, Americans are European. No surprise, we knew this. But going back to the beginning of the video when I was talking about semantics, I think the reason why a lot of people play these games is because I think there are people who think the world has always been as populated as it is. There was once a time where a lot of the world was vacant. And there's a lot of this discourse about where people are actually from and etc, etc. You can acknowledge that you're European genetically, whilst also being proud to be American. I am African, of African descent, but I am Grenadian. I am very, very proud to be Grenadian. That's where my ancestors fled to. That's the place that they call home. That's where I was raised. I am very proud, but I could also acknowledge where I'm actually from. And I think a lot of people have a hard time in doing both.
Baby, you do something to me. I can't lie, you got me. Baby, you do something to me. I can't lie, you got me. You're the one I want, you're the one I see, the one that's gonna be right beside of me. You're the one I want, you're the one I need, the one that's gonna be